Greetings, one and all. I'm thrilled to be sharing this episode of Into the Greenwood with you. In a very real way, today's guest was an inspiration behind this whole podcast. I first learned about Patricia Gonsalves when she and experimental archaeologist Stephen Fox were interviewed on the Saga Thing podcast. Saga Thing is a great podcast that is currently celebrating its 10th anniversary. So congratulations, John and Andy. Most episodes involve a detailed but rather light-hearted examination of an Icelandic saga. But their saga brief episodes involve interviews with various experts on a variety of subjects, such as their episode on medieval archery with Patricia and Stephen. During their interview, Patricia mentioned that her lifelong passion for archery that has led to such things as her becoming a competitor in international events, a consultant in Hollywood, an expert in the history of archery and bow making, and a teacher and mentor for others, stemmed from an early love of Robin Hood. The primary mission for Into the Greenwood has always been to examine how we can expand upon the legends of Robin Hood, to learn more about nearly any facet that can link back to that character. What did it mean to be a medieval outlaw? How hard is it to make one's own bow and arrows? What trees make the best bows and why? How did archery develop? What are the physics that an archer needs to be aware of? These are just some of the questions that Patricia Gonsalves has studied and often put into practice. She was always the guest that I knew I wanted to interview for the podcast, and I'm so glad that we were finally able to make it happen, and that I was finally able to find the time to edit the episode. During the interview, we discussed some of the most significant archaeological finds in relation to our understanding of the history of archery, such as the Holmegaard Bow of the Neolithic, to the Tudor-era shipwreck of the Mary Rose. We'll also discuss the making of bows, making arrows, different types of draws, a phenomenon known as the archer's paradox, historical archery tournaments, trick shooting, and get into some details from Patricia's time as the archery consultant for the CW shows Arrow, The Flash, and Legends of Tomorrow, as well as a whole lot more. Now, string your bow, take aim, and loose your arrow as we enter the Greenwood with archer, historian, consultant, and teacher, Patricia Gonsalves. So it's still the work day there for you, though. You're calling from your Lykopis Archery center, right?
Yep, we have, I'm going to put you on camera, Blair. We have one of my competitors back there working on their competition arrows. This is our upstairs. So this is our crafting area. This is the arrow crafting class arrows, some of them. Anyway, you can see some more back there. And then, I don't know if I can turn this camera around. I don't think so. And then there's downstairs.
Yes.
So there's our retail wall. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, can you see the person?
I can. Yep, they wave.
That's Eva, who will be running the camp this year.
Excellent.
Yeah, we went from a really, really big space to a much, much smaller space, but the students seem to really like the space better. I find it's more cozy. It's more cozy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As long as you still got enough room to, draw your bows.
Yeah, we're gonna be doing a little bit of renos, but we're gonna move some things back. So we're shooting, I don't know, it's about 40 feet, roughly. Yeah. And it's street exposure, and I can't complain because on that side of us is a gourmet donut shop, and on that side of us is a brewery.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a dangerous situation.
It's a very, my ass is, yes. It's a lot of like, do you want to have donuts or beer before class? And you're like, oh, I don't think beer before class is a good idea. Well, let's meet a couple hours before class. We can have beer and then grab a donut. You're like,
yeah.
That's lunch, right? That's lunch.
Yeah. Calories. What doesn't matter the source, right?
Right. See, we're on the same.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and start with you just giving a little bit of an introduction to yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Do you want like the full spiel?
Let's get the full spiel. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Patricia. I'm a retired Red Seal chef. I am now half a century old. Is that right? Right? Is that right?
Half a century young.
Half a century. I'm half a century young.
Half a century, yeah.
I have been doing archery for 41 years. I've been shooting on and off for 41 years. I've been teaching for a little bit less than that, about 10 years less than that. I moved away from Olympic style archery in my teens. I just didn't, it took the joy out of the archery. I became a chef because I foolishly listened to a grade 7 teacher that told me archery wasn't a job. So this is where I usually interject with, don't let people negate your dreams. Obviously, we're going to have to do other things to get to where we want to go, but don't let other people negate your dreams. So I became a Red Seal chef instead, retired at 24 years of cooking due to a vehicular collision while I was on my bicycle. And due to the support of some friends, I started to just teach archery on a regular basis, created a program at another Western martial arts school. And then I was invited to join the cast or the crew of the television show Arrow. And I was there from pilot to finale. I was one of 5 crew that did pilot to finale. And I was the only crew that started on the show and finished the show. Like everybody else went away and came back, except it was myself and one cameraman. So I'm really proud of the work that I did on Arrow. Film is not an exactly easy world to work in. I didn't think I would encounter a more difficult world than working in kitchens and logging camps and such, but boy, was I wrong. But I did enjoy my time somewhat on Arrow. Like, I'm just really proud of what I did. And through Arrow, I was able to travel and continue my research with archery, and also open Lykopis and start a traditional and historical archery school. I've competed internationally. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of historical. There are none. I shouldn't say there's not a lot. There's literally no historical traditional competitions in Canada aside from SCA, Society for Creative Anachronism competitions, and those are not recognized by World Archery. So I know the US has a few, like the Fight Archery in, I believe it's Utah on the Salt Flats, and there's another one. I'm not really sure where it is. I would love to be able to get something like that started up here, but yeah, that's basically it. I love bows, boats, dogs, and plaid shirts. Yeah.
So there's a whole list of things there that I want to get to, including how you mentioned doing Olympic style archery, but something different now. So those kind of different styles of archery, the idea of historical archery and historical archery competitions, working with archery on film, and also what you do at your school. But before we get to all that, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what initiated those dreams of archery before a 7th grade teacher attempted to crush them.
I had a bit of a unique childhood. I was just discussing this with my competitor and and Eva downstairs. I'm one of those Generation X. We weren't allowed to have emotions. Yeah. We grew up tough. And I'm originally from the West Indies, and my father's dream was to live on a boat, and that's what we did. So back in the 80s, way back in the 80s, you didn't have televisions on boats.
No.
I didn't grow up with a lot of TV. I guess I should kind of clarify on that. I didn't grow up with a lot of television. I grew up with books, and my father was an avid reader when he was a child, because there wasn't TV when he was a child in the 40s, especially in the West Indies. So he grew up on radio plays and books, and that's pretty much what I grew up on. So one of the books that he gave me was Robin Hood. And I don't, honestly, like, I read The Three Musketeers. I was 8. I read The Three Musketeers as well. All those kind of classics. And I've tried to sort of figure this out my whole life. What really drew me to Robin Hood over, say, Stevenson's Black Arrow or D'Artagnan or any of those. I don't know why it was Robin Hood, but something about the story, and it was Howard Pyle's Robin Hood. Something about the story really grabbed me, and something about the artwork by Wyeth. That was the copy that I had. It just, yeah, it really grabbed me, and I still have that book.
I've got my old Howard Pyle Robin Hood, and that was the book that inspired me to do this podcast. Was the Howard Pyle?
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. And the Wyeth artwork, just, I mean, the Robin Hood tattoo I have on my back is based on the Wyeth artwork. And when I went to Sherwood in 2013, and I took the book with me, and my father had passed away the year before, and it just seemed like a full circle for me. So yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. I think it was a little bit of, the swashbucklery. My dad and I used to watch a lot of the Errol Flynn, Captain Blood, and Robin Hood, and all those kind of those movies. And I come from what is probably inaptly named the Foxy Robin Hood from Disney. I think I was just kind of drawn to the whole concept of empathy. Like, Robin has empathy for the poor. That's the underlying thing in it.
Yeah. He's a champion.
Yeah. I also read Ivanhoe, and that kind of touched with me. And Robin Hood, Scott puts Robin Hood in there, and that's where he becomes a Saxon. But as I got older and I reread the story and the Pyle version and all the other version, and eventually some of the stuff in Piers Plowman, the mention of Robin Hood in Piers Plowman, I began to see the other aspects of Robin Hood. It wasn't just a good defeating the bad. The world wasn't quite so black and white. I began to really notice like how much Robin despised the church, how abusive the church was. And I think that book also, it started, my father, I'm a lot of my dad's kid. So, my mother was really into fashion and bling and looking good. And okay, so am I like to look neat and tidy, but I'm probably the neatest and tidiest hiker you'll ever see. But my father was a real adventurer. I mean, he was the black sheep of the family, and he was a real adventurer, and he raised me like that. So, and an animosity towards the church as well. And I began to see in the book, like, just like all of the versions, no matter which version you're reading, including Ivanhoe, there's a really good look at the church and what was happening in medieval times. And that's kind of what led me to down that forever, ever, ever, never ending badger hole of history. And the way we perceive history, and looking at how the church changed during the Renaissance to go from the ancient or Roman way of religion and a quasi-religious freedom to how the Christian church, and dare I say the white Jesus, just kind of like, it's almost right. Looking at it from a modern point of view, you're just like, how did you not see the manipulation? But then when you look at it historically, you see it. And as every time I read Robin Hood, it's something else. It's political, it's a romance story, even though Marion and our romance and our comedic was added during the Renaissance. The story has had a profound effect on history. Everything from Henry VIII busting into Catherine of Aragon's bedchamber, dressed as Robin Hood with all of his lords, because that's what every woman wants. Your husband coming out from behind a tapestry dressed in tights. I mean, it's really influenced us, and as a society, I think as a whole, and as myself, just kind of Robin Hood definitely influenced on how I looked at the world and what I chose to pursue as an adult. Because, and it's something we talk to the kids about, is that while we look at Robin as the hero and standing up for the poor, we can't forget that he became an outlaw. And really, we talk about what exactly an outlaw is. You are outside the law. That means you can fall victim to literally anybody and you have zero recourse, right? You can be robbed and you can't go to the sheriff and be like, I've been robbed, because you're an outlaw. You're a wolf's head.
Legal standing. Yeah.
You have nothing. And, I think that the story of Robin Hood, we treat it a lot now as a child's story, but it wasn't written as a child's story. Same with things like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. People are like, those are kids' books. And I'm like, they're really not. Robin Hood was written for adults. It was written as an adult story. And I believe that it was written to, if anything out of Robin Hood and that I've taken away from that book and rereading that book is to constantly be asking questions. Yes, he stood up for the poor, but murdering people is probably not the best way to go about things. But also, in who he was, how much recourse did he have against those guys? Probably not much. So that book to me really stands for the continued and never-ending struggle of injustice,
right?
For those of us that are not rich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're in a corrupt system, your avenues of recourse become limited.
Exactly, as well as though looking at that system from the other side, when you are the person with the money, you don't see the corruption.
Mm-hmm.
It's right. Just like that saying of when you're the privileged, equality will make you feel like you're the underdog, right? Like it might feel uneven or like you're being attacked when you're the top of the ladder and then people are pushing for everyone for equality, you suddenly feel attacked because you've never had to face that adversity. So I think for Robin Hood, that's another thing is like, especially when his origin sort of changed into being a Saxon, and now he was fighting against these invaders from France, late Vikings. He's fighting against that kind of injustice that they have brought, and he has no recourse. So, his lands are forfeit and all that kind of, he went from being a huscarl one day to being a lowly peasant in the feudal system the next day. Your fate can change like that. And how do you deal with it? You go out and you murder 7 foresters. Put on some sexy green and you're good to go.
Get some buddies to hang out with you in the woods.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who doesn't want to go hang out in the woods?
Yeah, with their buddies. Shoot some arrows.
Yeah, I'd trade that. I'd trade that. Absolutely.
So on the topic though of history, you've done a lot of work and research into the history of archery. I've listened to other interviews that you've given where you've talked about traveling around Europe, visiting museums, seeing some of the oldest bows that we have. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that sort of experience of seeing, like, kind of what your thoughts were upon seeing these bows that date back thousands and thousands of years.
One of my favorite stories is when I wanted to go to Denmark, because that's where the Holmegaard Bow is, which is the oldest bow we found, complete bow we found archaeologically. And I went into the museum, and if you ever have a chance to go to Copenhagen, I highly recommend it. I would move there in a heartbeat. Don't worry, I won't abandon any of you.
Just bring them with
you. I walked by it twice and I didn't see it because there was a giant auroch skeleton, which was the main display.
I mean, that's pretty neat also, of an extinct oxen.
And they're freaking huge. Like they, I worked on a farm when I was a kid and when I was in my teens, some of the best years of my life. And I thought, like, some of those Hereford bulls were big, but man, those things are big. So I went to the curators and I was like, I'm looking for this bow. And they're like, what? And that's where I learned the Scandinavian word for bow, which is bogen. And they went through the artifacts list and they found it. And when I realized I'd walked past it a few times, I felt it. And then I looked at it and I was, even now you can see it, I was like really overwhelmed with emotion. It was so much more than I thought it would be. It just, I couldn't stop looking at it. I could not stop looking at it. There was an entire the National Museum in Copenhagen is probably one of the best museums I have ever been to, but I just couldn't stop looking at it. And I started to cry. I am totally not ashamed that I got really verklempt, and I actually started to cry. And this fella comes, he pats me on the shoulder, and he's like, "It's okay. It's been dead a really long time." And I was like, "What?" And then I realized he was talking about. I had a digital camera. I had a Canon, and I literally filled up that SD card with photos of this bow, and then I literally filled up my phone with photos of the Holmegaard Bow. And I've gone to see it every time I was in Copenhagen over the 8 years that I traveled. I went to see it every chance I could possibly get, and every single time I got really emotional about it. We are very much misled by Hollywood. When I say the words our ancestors, most people tend to think big, dumb, lumbering cave people, God forbid the Flintstones. The concept of our ancestors is greatly and incorrectly influenced by
they had clubs and sticks and
and we dragged women to caves by their hair and all that kind of BS. And when you look at the Holmegaard bow, that thing is a machine. That is a well thought out, well carved, well balanced machine. And it was in 2000, I believe it was 17 or 18, with Dr. Jürgen Junkman, who did, he was part of the team that did the research on Ötzi's bow. I went and stayed with him and his partner, Maren, who is an amazing woman. Her specialty of research is at Laddell's. I could stay at their house in her office and listen to her talk forever. I made a replica of the Holmegaard bow with him. I took it from a place in Zug in Switzerland all the way to Istanbul, and then from Istanbul to Amsterdam to Copenhagen to Sweden to the United States to back here to Canada. That's twice I've traveled across Europe with a 6-foot piece of stick. So that is like, honestly, when I got home, I didn't put a string on it because I learned my lesson the hard way. Traveling with a bow and a string, that is the one thing that customs will lose.
I see.
100% of the time. So when I got home, I put a string on it and I went out to my range in my backyard, and I shot a couple times into my hay bales, and then I went into the forest behind my house and I did some stump shooting, and I have no words for it. Literally standing in a forest, shooting a replica of this bow that's thousands upon thousands of years old. I don't know if you're familiar with the bow, but it's Ötzi's bow is just a simple stick compared to this thing. It's got an inset handle. It's a lever action. The back is rounded. The belly is flat. And I could just, Time travel is not a thing, but I definitely had a moment standing in that tiny little unkept forest that's behind my place, and everything just got simpler. A brief moment. There was no noise of the metro. There was no noise of the highway. There was nothing. It was just me, the forest, and the bog, and this well carved stick. And the fact that I did it with metal tools and it was done with stone tools, it just blows my mind.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely a misleading, like you said, from Hollywood in relation to, our ancestors, but also in our terms of what people think of as bows and what can be a bow and how bows work. I had a moment where I was briefly confused when I was watching the Hawkeye television series that came out a year or so ago, where he had a line about like, "Oh, I just use 2 sticks and a string." And it took me a moment to even figure out that was how he was describing a bow as 1 stick, a string for the bowstring, and then the other stick being the arrow. And I was like, "Oh, that's what you meant? That's actually, I don't know, that feels like a very poor description. I feel like 2 sticks and a string is the bow and arrow I made as a kid in my backyard. Sure, but not an actual bow that you could really go and use and either compete in competitions with or hunt animals with or really use as a bow."
It's funny. I never watched the series. I have a problem with Jeremy Renner and his archery. He was very dismissive of it in the movies. And working in Hollywood is, as I said before, I don't really touch too much on my time in Hollywood. I still do work on films. I would much rather be working on documentaries, but I think Renner was very dismissive of the skill that is taken, that you need to shoot a bow and arrow. But also part of that problem is that when they sent him for training, they did exactly what Jennifer Lawrence did with Katniss, and they went to an Olympic archer. And Olympic archery that's it. Like it, I call Olympic archery the blinders archery, because anytime I've ever come into contact with archers who shoot Olympic style, they're really blind to the rest of the archery world and can be extremely dismissive and rude about it. And he's right. I don't disagree with what he said. Olympic archery does not transfer onto screen whatsoever. In fact, because he said that, and because of what Jennifer Lawrence, she went to Katuna Loreg for training. She went to an Olympian. It doesn't play well. Anybody who's an archer sees her in the first movie. She goes, I don't know if you've seen the first Hunger Games, but she steps out behind the tree, does the Olympic stance. Well, I can tell you as a hunter, the deer would have been like,
see ya. Yeah.
It doesn't translate. And he was right. And that's why, like, when I trained Steven, everybody concentrates on the movement, the dynamic movement of archery on the release. So we can use our friend Legolas as an example. Peter Jackson thought the archery looked pretty boring. And so Orlando Bloom's reaction was to play the hand away, right? Yeah, we both know if you do that when you're doing archery, your arrow's not going to go where you want it. In fact, it's going to go quite the opposite. It's going to go like this. So when I trained Steven, all of that was in my head, right? So when we went through a month of, we did a 5 days of training.
And when you say Steven, that's Stephen Amell, the star of the show,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The show where he's playing the superhero Green Arrow.
Yeah.
Or based on the Green Arrow.
We just call him a hero because he has no superpower.
Yeah. Well, based on the comic books from DC Comics.
Yeah. Yeah. So we trained every day in an extremely cold warehouse, 5 days a week for a month. We worked on making sure, because you don't shoot real arrows, you're shooting CG. You shouldn't be shooting real arrows. There's a lot of safety issues regarding archery in Hollywood. But I made the dynamic movement, the knocking on, not the release. And that's where most people, because again, the gun culture has influenced so much. When you pull the trigger, you see people, they do this, right? Like that's what's telling you the gun is shooting. Whereas with archery, there is none of that. Yeah. So, because guns move when you shoot them. So yeah, when I trained Steven, all of that was in my head, but I never watched the Hawkeye series. I really like the actress. Like her True Grit. She was amazing in that movie, and I'm glad that they chose her to play. And when she went archery lessons and when she came to set the first day, from what I've heard, Renner was like, you wasted your time because we don't shoot real arrows. But she looks a hella better than he does. Like her form is way better than his. Right. And I just found him to be really dismissive of the skill needed to look like a real archer. But he's not wrong. Really it is. And I wouldn't say 2 sticks in a string. I'd say a big stick, a string, and a few smaller sticks.
Yeah. And there's a lot that goes into, though, making the bows and arrows. You've made a lot of bows and a lot of arrows.
I've made a lot of arrows. I haven't made that many bows. I've made maybe 10 bows. Well,
10 more than most people.
Yes. I personally have made 10 bows for myself, but I made sure that, like, I trained with I went and learned how to bowcraft with 6 different people from 6 different countries. And I don't know if you're familiar with Clay Hayes. He does a YouTube channel. I've video chatted with him to talk to him about something. He's a very nice guy. He's really nice. He could totally monetize what he's doing. And my father really raised me to be one of those people to make sure you have all of your information. And I really listen to that. Like, to me, before I'm going to teach something, I want to make sure I know what's what, as well as to continue to upgrade that knowledge, not just be like, well, I know it now and
yeah,
that's it. I get asked sometimes when I used to do Comic Cons and stuff, but one of the main questions you get asked, how many arrows do you think you've made? And I'm like, I don't even want to think about that. Like, thousands. I've made thousands of arrows.
I was talking to some other people that are kind of in the sort of Robin Hood fan community about speaking to you, and one of the questions that they had was, how difficult and time consuming is that? Like, what would be the challenges if you had outlaws trying to live in the woods? How hard would it be for them to properly fletch arrows?
Well, fletching wouldn't necessarily be the issue. I mean, Eva's, so this is something Eva's done with the youth class. We start with a board. Generally what you would do is take a big knife, and I would have brought my big knife if I'd known that was a question, but we have a 14-inch knife. The kids don't use it. And you make a board out of a piece of wood. So when you split a piece of wood, like a log, it's going to follow the grain of the wood, which is why, you buy a 2x4, you leave it out in the rain, and it goes like this because it's trying to follow the grain, right? When you have a milled piece of wood straight, it's not going to be the same as when you take it apart with a knife or a froe. So that's the first step. So you got to cut down your tree. You got to make sure it's got some straight grain in it. You got to let it dry out for a year. Then you're going to cut it into the length that you need. So say 30 to 35 inches. You then got to make your board. Then you got to split out your square piece. So you get a square piece, and then you use, hang on, I'll show you. So then you get one of these.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that. So it's got
a channel through it. Yeah. A triangular groove. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 45 degree angles, which you would have done with your knife. I did this with my table saw. And you take one of these, which is a little plane. We get these guys out of Turkey, and you put your square piece into here, and then
you start shaving down the wood.
You start taking the corners off. Blair, could you pass me one of the arrows on the other side of this pillar? And then eventually what you get is one of these, right? So Eva's youth class took a poplar board, and they made about 12 of these. And then the next step is, you can see that, I don't know if you can really see that, it's a little warpy.
Yeah.
Right? It's not perfectly flat.
It doesn't exactly look like a dowel I'd get at a craft store.
Exactly. And then what you'd have to do is then you got to steam this. You got to steam it straight. You can have 2 of these boards, and then you steam it, and then you put the board, like, can you see it sticking up there?
Yeah. So
then we put the board on top,
rounded stick in that groove,
and bind them together to make them straight. And you do have to continue, in Robin Hood times, because I don't want to say medieval times. In Robin Hood times, you would have had to continue to keep your arrows straight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this whole process, it takes a really long time just to make one arrow. So realistically, I do a lot of bushcraft, and realistically, if I was to, just suddenly find myself in the apocalypse, I could go out and make a bow, cut down a tree, make a bow, make some arrows, get some dinner right away. But if I wanted something that was going to last a long time, like say Ötzi's bow or the Holmegaard bow, and again, the Holmegaard bow is like, it is an insanely shaped thing for how old it is. So yeah, realistically, I could go down and cut down a green sapling of say here, I could use maybe elm or ironwood and make a bow. But for something, if that was to be like I wouldn't want to work on something long term. And of course, then when you're making the string, you're dealing with making cordage, and string would be made out of sinew in our Stone Age times. So yeah, realistically, sure, they definitely could have done it. Something that we need to take into account when we're talking about Robin Hood and longbows within the Robin Hood eras is, a lot of the time we talk about English yew, or that the bows were made of English yew. English yew is very similar to our Pacific yew here. We are a damp environment. We are a moist environment. So it grows like
very wavy.
Whereas when you go to Italy or Spain, you get some really nice. So, the whole idea, part of what made that something that we can't forget is something that made Robin a wolf's head or an outlaw was the very fact that he had a bow that could kill a man. This was a big no-no.
Yeah.
And so, I don't necessarily and this is my own personal opinion, I don't necessarily think that all of the bows that say Robin's merry men would have had would have been you. They would have used what was on hand and what would have worked. So Sherwood and Barnsdale wood, the two were connected at a time. A lot of the trees in there are birch, which doesn't make the greatest bow, and oak. So, when you're in that sort of something I think we need to remember is that when you're in that sort of survival situation, you're going to use what's there.
So more ideal English longbow would really be made of, say, Spanish yew trees. And, I understand Spain basically got deforested at one point.
Absolutely,
because there was such demand for the bows made from these trees. But you could make a moderately serviceable or usable bow from oak.
Yeah. In our last bow crafting class, one of our students is making a bow out of red oak. So yeah, you can make a bow out of oak. You can make a bow out of anything. Is it going to work? Not necessarily.
So what makes some woods better than others for making a bow?
The natural flexibility. So that is what makes the yew. That's what makes the yew the best wood. Is because it's naturally laminated, right? Like that heartwood, that sapwood. I could show you an example, but there's that honey color and the light color. Yew is a naturally laminating wood. It naturally flexes and it naturally compresses and tenses and comes back into its position better than any other wood. Personally, when people ask me what my favorite bow, and I'm probably going to catch trouble for this, but my favorite bow is the Finn Ugrik or Hansi Mansi 2-wood bow, which you find from Finland to Siberia. And I just think it's an amazing piece of machinery. And they've taken two bits of wood, or two types of wood that don't make good bows, and put them together and made an amazing bow. But we don't have any medieval Welsh or English longbows. We have Viking longbows, but we don't have any English or Welsh longbows, depending on who you talk to. I prefer Welsh. Sorry, Ian. All the bows off the Mary Rose are Spanish yew. And when I was in Spain to see the cave paintings in Vallarta, there was in the little town where the museum was, there was 4 yew trees planted in the middle of the square. Well, 5 actually, 1 in the middle, and those were they were so straight. And I may or may not have taken some sap, and a fella approached me and started to speak to me. I speak a little bit of Spanish. I lived in Florida for a while, so I speak a little bit of Spanish. I was already there for a week, so it starts to come back. And he told me, he's like, I found this really funny. He's like, these were planted in the time of your Queen Elizabeth. And they were only about this round, maybe 12 to maximum 20 inches across.
Yeah.
Like diameter. So those were now at the right size to cut down for bows. So when you think about the demand, that's over
400 years. You said time of Queen Elizabeth, so that would be Elizabeth the First. So Elizabeth over 400 years ago, they've been growing.
And they were planted because of the demand for the yew tree during the Tudor era and previous to the Tudor era. That demand almost totally decimated the yew tree in Spain. So I find that really interesting, and especially the fact that if you were a merchant and you took your ship from Italy and you were bringing, let's say you brought olives and olive oil from Italy, and then you stopped in Spain and you picked up wine, and then you got yourself into Portsmouth, and the what do you call it, the tariff guy was like, oh well, you got to pay a tariff on this and you got to pay a tariff on that, and I see you stopped in Spain, I need all this wine, and no, I want 25 bow staves. Oh, you don't have that? Okay, you can't land your goods. Go back to Spain and get this stuff. Like the fact that yew wood was a currency, and a huge commodity as well. And I've seen the bows on the Mary Rose. I've held the bows on the Mary Rose that were taken from the Mary Rose, 2.5 inches across.
Yeah, real thick. Solid,
like almost that, like big bows.
And the Mary Rose, again, for listeners, is a Tudor era ship, time of Henry VIII, right?
Henry
That
VIII, yeah.
that sank off the coast of England and was dredged up. Lots of really well preserved material there, including bows, including arm guards,
Dog
including skeletons that we've been able to identify as archers because of how their
and a
bodies
dog.
deformed.
Don't
And a
forget the dog.
and a dog, yes. But a wealth of information on a lot of it that has to do with archery and how archery was utilized at that time.
I think the Mary Rose has, and her excavation has as much influence on my archery life and my life as Robin Hood did, because I was a child when they rediscovered her.
Mhm.
And at the time, marine archaeology was not a science. And I watched the excavation on TV with my father. I watched them raise her, and I watched this woman, Alex Hildred, diving. And I very much had grown up in the time of like women don't dive kind of thing. And she was instrumental in the start of what would become marine archaeology. And I worked on a TV show with a handsome guy, and people just watching people lose their minds when they would meet Stephen. And even myself, having people come up to me and be like, "Oh my God, you're the archery person on Arrow." Well, that was me. So I went to the Mary Rose Museum, and I met with Dr. Alex Hildred. And about halfway through the tour of the museum, I suddenly made the connection, because we came to the photo from the 80s of when they raised her. And she's like, "And this is me on the barge." And I was like I just lost my mind. I could no longer speak. My mouth and my brain disconnected. I was looking at a hero, because when I was younger, I wanted, I grew up on boats. I wanted to be a marine archaeologist. That's what I wanted to really grow up to be, was a marine archaeologist. And I just got told constantly, it's not a science. It's not a science. It's not a science. And now, she is, Dr. Alex Hildred is the curator of ordnance. So she's in charge of all the things that were brought off the Mary Rose. And, I'm not big on hero worship or anything like that, especially for Hollywood people, but that was one of the highlights of my traveling. I was completely speechless. It was mind blowing to meet your hero from when you were 8. Not only that, she handed me one of these bows, and I freaked out. I was like, eh. I pulled my hand away. She kind of smiled at me, and I'm just like, eh. And I had the white glove on, and that was really incredible. And then to actually see the Mary Rose and see that skeleton of the archer, and I learned so much. And it all stemmed from reading Robin Hood as an 8-year-old. Yeah. And those bows are big. Those bows are big. They are so big. The arrows are huge.
What? So when we're talking about these big bows, like what kind of draw would they have in terms of poundage? How hard would they be to pull back?
The archery is it's not necessarily about strength. Strength plays a factor, but a lot of it has to do with form. So, we watch movies about the 100 Years' War, or people shooting longbows, Robin Hood, whether it's Errol Flynn or Russell Crowe or whoever, or Cary Elwes, and they're making it look really easy. It wouldn't have been that easy. There's if you watch Ian Coote or Mark Stretton shoot their longbows, they're not just going like lift and draw. There's a whole physical body movement that needs to go into that in order to facilitate that draw. So the estimate for the Mary Rose bows, and I believe, I'm not 100% sure that this is the case, but I believe that this is where the standard for what was considered a war bow was set, was the Mary Rose bows. The estimate is between 80 well, I shouldn't say between, but 80 pounds plus. I have had folks try to school me on Facebook saying those bows were like 200 pounds plus. And I'm like, no.
That's pretty intense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I asked Dr. Hildred about that, and she was really honest. She's like, there's a fellow, he's passed away a few years ago, Robert Hardy, and he's like well known within the archery community, especially in England. He did the replicas. and it was his estimate 100 plus, but yeah, it seems like 80 plus, but you're not, really, you get tired when you're shooting. Ask Ian that. If you get a chance to talk to him, ask him. You get tired when you're shooting. You can ask one of our team members, Annette Weimeran. She is a young woman. She's got 16-inch arms, and she shoots 80 pounds, 100 pounds plus. And she'll tell you, like, it takes a lot out of you. This is not something when, like, again, the movies kind of give us a misconception. Shoot. Look at me. I'm shooting over 100 pounds forever. This is just not a thing, man. You get physically exhausted. You are perspiring. It makes you really hungry, and you're exhausted. You're physically tired. And I can't imagine. I have done reenactments, and I have heard arrows coming at you, and it's terrifying. And when we tend to glorify that kind of war aspect of it, but it's scary and it's messy, and shooting 80 pounds or more, excuse my language, but man, that's a bitch. Like it really drains you.
Yeah.
I shot on Kreshe at the battlefield of Kreshe. I've done it twice now. I shot a 60-pound longbow, and really I did like half an hour of shooting, maybe 10 arrows tops. And on the way home, I was like, it's difficult. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I can't imagine being those Welshmen out there on any of those 3 battlefields shooting like that. Like it's hard, and it's taxing. It's very taxing on your body physically. Yeah. So you do have to be strong, but you also have to have really good form.
This is why there was the mandatory practice in England at various times.
Yeah, on Sundays. Yeah. And again, one of the misconceptions that people have is that our yeoman, which is a later word, that's not the word that would have been used at the time. The word that would have been used at the time was Latin, and it's velites, which means free man. They wouldn't, just like our modern military, they wouldn't have been keeping those bows in their houses. They were handed out to them at practice, and they were taken back by the priest and stored in the church I believe, at the end of practice. This was not a personal weapon. The bow that you shot in the morning on the battlefield might not be the same bow that you shoot in the afternoon. So part of that practice is being able to, the bow you got in the morning might have been 110 pounds. The bow you're being handed in the afternoon, it's been shot, it's soft, it's been shot all day. It might now only be 80 pounds.
Yeah. Individuals at the time not allowed, as you were saying earlier, to carry a lethal bow, and people weren't allowed to just go bow hunting in the forest. I mean, and that comes up all the time in Robin Hood, the idea of the forest law and people getting.
Yes and no. We have to establish the bow hunting. You could not shoot the king's deer.
Right.
Which are the red deer. And a deer, you can drop an average size deer with 40 to 45 pounds. You can drop a man with 40 to 45 pounds. So the bows sorry?
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the bows be harder to kill than a good deer.
The bows you were allowed to have were much lighter draw weight, and they were for shooting hares, or what you would refer to in the US as varmint, shooting hares or small game animals, and with a blunt, like a wooden blunt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that would have been made on a pole lathe, which is a lathe with a foot pedal that goes up and down, and we can date those right back to like Roman times, right?
Yeah. People could have bows, but they wouldn't be war bows. They wouldn't be long bows.
Could have been like the village bows. It's not like you personally owned that thing.
Right.
It was we don't. So I find in modern society we have a bit of a misconception about, we all live so independently.
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself lucky. And a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're 50 and you have roommates." I'm like, yeah, but we have a community in our house. 3 of us garden. We have chickens. Like it takes a village, and I find that modern society really moves us away from that. So when you're looking at a bow, let's take a longbow as an example. The person shooting the bow is most likely not the person who chopped down the tree. They're also most likely not the person who split the tree, dried the billet, dried the stave, made the stave into a bow. There's probably not all the same person. Same goes for the arrows. That's why we have last names like Fletcher. That was the person that fletched the arrow. Different people in the community came together to make those things. And during the 100 Years' War, that's where guilds came from, right? You needed a standardization. So guilds sprung up. And I mean, if we didn't have guilds, we wouldn't have unions.
Mm-hmm.
So something else from the 100 Years' War, when those weletes, those free men, were given their freedom to go over to France to fight this, they came back with booty. So they came back with independent monies. They were no longer having to be under the yoke of feudalism. They had a form of independence, which we now call the middle class. Right. And I mean, we're only sticking with Western Europe. We haven't talked about Eastern Europe and what was happening over there either.
No,
because those bows are way more complicated.
Yeah. No, there's a whole wealth of different archery traditions and styles.
Yeah. And I a lot of people talk about the BBC series that was like a few years ago where he had an Asiatic composite bow, or a bow of the Asiatic composite profile, sometimes called a horse bow. I'm of the camp where horses don't shoot bows, so it's not a horse bow. You just know there's a little.
Yeah.
It's like two houses. It's kind of funny. I think it's funny. Yeah, they did that Robin Hood with the BBC, and he had an Asiatic composite, and I was like, oh, he wouldn't have that, and it would have delaminated in the moisture of England. Well, it probably very well could have delaminated but it's TV, and we can do whatever we want.
That is I've seen that television series, and that is the least of the ridiculous things in that show.
Right. And I mean, I love that show. Because it made people be like, wait, there's something else other than the giant stick. Like it to me, it opened up. What is that? What is that mustache shaped looking thing? And one of my greatest accomplishments on Arrow, and I'm super proud of this, is that we got an Asiatic composite onto the show. I got an Asiatic composite onto the show. And the character's name is Cupid, played by the phenomenal Amy Gumanik, who is incredible in a show called Turn. I love her, and she is the only character, as far as I know, please correct me if I'm wrong, fans out there, that I know on a North American TV show that's shot with her thumb. And fun fact, while I'm not going to tell you the draw weight of all the bows of the other people, her bow is 25 pounds, and she shot that with her thumb, and she was phenomenal. And she's no more than maybe 5'4". Sorry, Amy, if that's wrong, but yeah, she was tiny little thing, and she trained so hard to shoot with that bow, and she shot it with her thumb, and I was so colossally proud of her. And that we got a bow. So I got to Turkey the next year, and so many people were like, oh my God, it's a thumb and it's Turkey. Ooh, it's just so excited about that. So
could you describe a little bit more about what that means to be shooting it with her thumb?
Yeah, when you shoot with your thumb, so it's an Eastern way of shooting. You use your thumb instead of your three fingers, or the Mediterranean draw, or the European draw, or the split finger draw. Those are all terms used to shoot with the three fingers. Whether your finger's above and the arrow's in between your index and your middle finger, or there's three fingers under where the arrow sits above, that's a more modern thing. You shoot with your thumb. You grab you put your thumb around the string. The string generally sits in the first crease of your thumb. We only have one crease. It is our strongest digit. And then you kind of make a fist. You wrap your index finger over your thumb. Now, depending where you are in that split of Eastern Europe to Asia to East, there's various different ways to put your fingers over your thumb. So if you look, Kyoto Japanese archery is a good example. they use a glove or a cylindrical type ring that fits over the thumb, and it's a very light grasp. It's fast. And then you look at the Turks, like they come all the way over. Like it, each different region you go to, it's roughly the same thing, but with slightly different grips on the string. It's faster to me because the arrow goes on the same side of the bow as your draw hand, so you don't need to thread the arrow through to the opposite side. Depending on where you're looking, so if you're some cultures would hold a bundle of arrows in their bow hand. I prefer the in the draw hand method. There's a few different ways to hold them in the draw hand, either by the nock and along your forearm, or by the tip and along your forearm. It's a faster, once you've practiced at it, it's a much faster way to knock on and shoot. Yeah.
I was watching the movie War of Arrows and noticed them firing with their arrows on that side of the bow, and
yeah,
that took me a moment of like, oh, I'm just so used to seeing those arrows on the inside, and that's what I do myself when I practice archery, and it's like that's just what I'm accustomed to, and it feels very steady, and it's like, oh wow, how are they even doing that? How are they keeping the arrow from just like flying all over the place?
The thing I love so much about the thumb draw is that I can turn my bow perpendicular to the, like, same horizontally with the arrow on the bottom, and it will stay on it'll stay. Yeah. It'll absolutely stay. I've shot laying flat on the ground on my belly. I've shot laying flat on the ground on my back, all with the thumb draw. I've shot on one leg upside down with my thumb. Yeah. So to me, it's just a much more versatile and faster draw. Interestingly enough, the word for archer, because that's a French word, changes between East and West. So in the West, the word that you have for archer, again, this is not even a word that you would get in England. Like when I thought I'd be sassy when I was in London, and what's your name at Starbucks? And I'm like, Archer. And I got it said Arfur. Arfur. They didn't actually, the word archer just didn't, longbowman is what they would know. So yeah, when you go from like Scandinavia all through Western Europe, the word is bow shooter.
Yeah, the idea of the bow. Right?
Yeah, and when you get on the East, the word is arrow thrower.
Interesting.
So right, it changes. It definitely, and it's almost a very definitive line from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. It's arrow shooter and or arrow thrower or arrow slinger or and bow shooter. Yeah. And I think that's because it's my personal opinion. I think in the East the concentration was on this.
Yeah.
And not this one. Yeah.
Yeah. They focus on how you're pulling back the arrow as opposed to how you're holding the bow.
Yeah, because in the East, the archery is very much based on like it's a lot of form. It's martial art, and that's what we do here at Lykopis. We teach archery as a martial art and a skill.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Lykopis and what you do there. The kind of, you've got a lot of classes on archery. I know you've mentioned one before called the Physics of Archery. What goes into that sort of class, and can you define what the archer's paradox is for the listeners?
So the Physics of Archery, it's not a class I do too much anymore, and again, this leads back to being a young woman in the 80s, being told that I couldn't pursue a career in archaeology because as a girl I wouldn't understand physics. So, which is hilarious to me now doing what I do. So the Physics of Archery, what we talk about is like the force of the bow, the weight of the arrow, the shape of the arrow, and the weight of the arrow before and after fletching and putting the tip on, how much drag you're going to have from the feathers, how much drop you're going to have from the weight of the arrow, the bow, matching the bow to the arrow or the arrow to the bow. You got to have the right spine on your arrow, which is your flexibility. If you shoot an arrow with the incorrect spine, there's a chance it could break and harm yourself, or it's just going to kind of go forward and drop because it doesn't have enough flex. Your bow is lesser draw weight and the arrow is too stiff or has lesser spine. So it won't project very far. So The whole physics of archery, like we're going through this right now with the competition team. We're ordering some arrows from Forrester, and he does hardwood arrows. Kevin's an amazing guy. And we were just talking on the phone this morning about making sure the taper was right and who shoots what draw weight and what spine. And if you shoot with the thumb, I find that when you, and this is a personal sort of thing, I find that when you, like my competition bow is 45 pounds, but my arrows are spine 10 pounds heavier, because I find when you shoot with the thumb, you have a little bit more, there's a little less on the paradox. There's definitely less on the paradox, and the arrow straightens out faster, so the physics of archery class that we used to teach was a lot about just trying to work all that stuff out, how to correctly match what you're doing. Everything affects the cast or the flight of your arrow, how heavy the tip is. Going to Turkey multiple times to compete, trying different diameters of arrow, different size of fletch, you're always going to gain something and you're always going to lose something. And isn't that just the story of life, though?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You might put smaller fletch on to increase velocity or to maintain a velocity because there's less drag, but then your arrow's not going to stabilize as fast. So then you go to 4 inches of fletch and your arrow's stabilizing really fast, but it's not going to the 60 meters that you need it to go to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically what that physics of archery class was about, was working all that, understanding all that stuff. Does that answer your question?
Most of it. Would you define for the audience what the archer's paradox is?
Right. So the archer's paradox is what happens to your arrow when you release it from your bow, either with your Mediterranean or your thumb draw. Your arrow flexes through the air. The energy created by the bow is pushing the arrow forward, but it's also pushing that energy through the arrow. Mm-hmm. So the back end is technically moving faster than the front end, and that energy is going through your arrow, making it wiggle like a snake, for lack of a better example. The middle will flex back and forth. So eventually they kind of do straighten out depending on how far you're shooting. And it also depends on, like, if the tip of the arrow is very heavy or the arrow is too long, that's gonna affect the archer's paradox. So the arrow is moving in 3 directions when you shoot it. It's wiggling like a snake. Yeah. Or some of my students say like a disco dancer. It's also moving forward, and it's also spinning, which is why you put the feathers on, the arrow never stops spinning. Movies, Hollywood, the arrow spins, Kevin Costner, and but the fletch is what stabilizes that spin, so it doesn't just go into like a crazy spinning at the front and spinning at the back all around, which is going to affect your trajectory. I like to describe the archer's paradox as the wiggly stick.
The wiggly stick, yeah. It's a really surprising thing to see. There's lots of YouTube videos out there that show slow motion archery shots, and it can really catch you off guard if you're so used to, the Hollywood films. You just see, thunk, the arrow flying very straight. But to watch those slow motion videos of really seeing how it really does wibble around.
It definitely wibbles around. It's a good word. The Robin Hood that we don't mention from the 90s, it didn't happen. That I was having a hard time with that movie, period, just in the theater in itself. And when that, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I think so.
With the guy with the mullet. When that scene happened and he shoots the arrow and
you follow the arrow?
Well, first he rips the fletch off with his teeth, which makes no sense. I can just hear the director, but it will look really cool. Those fletch would have tied on with sinew, so that would not have. Yeah. If you'd done that, there's a good chance the other fletch would have come off as well. Mm-hmm. But that movie, the same Robert Hardy I mentioned earlier, he worked on that film, and he tried, as far as I know, until the day when he passed, to get his name off of it because it was just so horrendous. Yeah. As far as archery goes, that is the worst Robin Hood film you can watch. But yeah, as soon as that arrow shot and it went, like, I got up and I walked out of the theater. I was like, this is no. And I really like that about the Russell Crowe one. Like there's the paradoxes there. So.
Yeah. You can see it in that one.
Yeah. And I mean, he trained pretty freaking hardcore for that role. Yeah.
So with the school, you also do Robin Hood camps and workshops. What
Yeah.
goes into those workshops?
I
And
just saw your Robin Hood hat behind you.
oh yeah, I have no problem.
So the kids at camp, it's a week-long camp. It's 5 days, Monday to Friday. And during camp, we like to do a lot of hands-on crafting. So they have a choice between making a hunter's pouch or a leather bottle called a costrel. And they seal the bottle with wax, so they actually work. So that's the secondary craft. They can make a bow. So they basically make board bows with that little plane, that little spoke shave. Yeah, and then we talk about Robin Hood. We tell the tales of Robin Hood, the various tales of Robin Hood. We talk about social justice because that is kind of the root of Robin Hood. How it's better to help rather than take. And here's one of them. I know it's a podcast, but this is just a leather bottle. It's double stitched. They only do one stitch, and then this one's not waxed, but they will wax them. So they have various shapes they can choose from. And yeah, they craft a bow, or they can craft an arrow or arrows, if up to 3 arrows. So they start with a goose fletch, and they'll cut that goose fletch down. They do it with a little pair of steel scissors made by a local blacksmith. They're similar to the ones you get on Lee Valley. And they do 5 days of crafting, and they also learn sword and shield or quarterstaff. So they can choose sword and shield, or quarterstaff. Yeah.
What age range is this for?
And 9 to 14. I would love to be able to take this camp to the outdoors, and I would love to offer an adult version of this camp. Every year we get people being like, so when's the big people one?
Yeah, I'd want to sign up for it if I was in Vancouver.
Yeah, we're trying to make that happen. We really are. But for me, for the camp here, one of the main things that I hear, almost every day in camp is it's harder to make a bow for reals than it is in Minecraft.
Harder to make a lot of things for real.
Yeah, and I think that while I myself I'm a gamer, I'm a bit of a monogamous gamer, but I play video games, and I believe that our younger generations are having a bit of a misconception of just how difficult things can be, and it's not as easy as it seems on the screen. And I think it's important that children learn some of these skills, or even just to acknowledge how difficult some of this stuff is. It's not as easy as it looks, because a lot of the time they struggle with just the tools. And I got to remind them, like, things aren't easy, and part of camp is learning to deal with that struggle. And we bring that back to Robin. We say, when he went from being a lord or a huscarl to suddenly just finding himself in the forest and being like, okay, so you got some clothes on your back, pretty soon that's going to be wet and soggy and gross, and you have nowhere to sleep. Here's a stump.
Right.
So he could have given up and just died in the bush, but instead he survived. So we talk a lot about personal accountability, survival, helping others survive, sharing skills. You can give a man a fish, but if you teach him how to make a fishing rod and a bone hook, it's a better chance that they'll be able to provide. So part of the root of our camp is really talking and implementing, sharing and helping, because there's always going to be kids that are going to be able to do things faster. So you have a choice. You finished your leather bottle on the second day, great, that's fantastic. Are you going to sit there and tell everybody you finished your leather bottle on day 1, or are you going to help somebody else? So that's really our goal in camp, is to give them some hands-on experience, as well as learning about cooperation, because the Robin Hood and the Merry Men never would have been able to accomplish any of the things they accomplished without cooperation and really good disguises.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read the book, you've read it, lots of them.
Yeah.
Robin almost always loses.
There's a whole lot of Robin Hood losing.
Yeah.
There's
And sometimes he does it on purpose, and sometimes he gets bested, but at no time does he get angry. When John chucks him in the water, he doesn't get out of the water and beat the living daylights out of John. He invites him to join the band and say, wow, you totally just kicked my Lincoln Green butt. Why don't you join us? Because I think that's really awesome. You beat me. And, in reality, if Robin was real or that situation really happened, you better believe Robin's going to turn to now Little John and be like, hey, can you show me how you chucked me in the water there? Can you show me that skill? Because if he was indeed a yeoman or a nobleman or what have you, he wouldn't have had that stick fighting skill. That's a forest skill. That's something you would have learned from living in the forest, fighting with a cudgel or something called a shillelagh or quarterstaff or a half staff. All of those things are the poor man's weapons, right? But that I'm sure Robin would have turned to John and been like, so teach me how you gave me a drubbing.
right. Dropping.
I love that word, drubbing.
Yeah, it's too bad that one's fallen out of common usage.
I try to use it as much as I can. We
Yeah,
also talk about stuff like that in camp too. I say drubbing and the kids are like, what? And we explain the etymology of the word. And, by the end of the week, they're like, oh, forsooth, I shall drub you.
So another aspect that is a popular one in the Robin Hood stories and connects to something you mentioned earlier, the historical archery tournaments. Robin going to an archery tournament is a bit of a staple. So what happens in the not unfortunately held in Canada archery tournaments?
Not yet.
Not yet. What do those look like?
So our team here at Lykopis, our team, we, except for over the COVID years, the plague years, I've attended the Conquest Cups in Istanbul since they first started. The Conquest Cup, as far as I know, is the largest archery competition in the world because it's us, the traditional and historical archers, it's Olympic archers, as well as compound. So it's all three of the popular disciplines. When I first went, it was probably about 80% men. And the last one that I attended, which was number 10, it was pretty close to 50-50, if not 50-50. So we are required to wear traditional garb. We shoot with traditional bows. At first, it was traditional materials only. Now those are cost prohibitive. Not everybody can afford a $1,000 to $5,000 bow or wait 3 years for their bow. They take a long time to make. So we shoot Asiatic. A lot of us shoot Asiatic composite profile type bows. So again, the mustache kind of shape. Yeah. And there's multiple different traditional and historical competitions throughout Europe and Asia. There's the World Nomad Games. As far as I know, the Indigenous Games have not included archery yet, but I know there's some folks moving towards it. If I'm not 100% sure, I haven't checked on that. They do archery on things called rendezvous, which is sort of reenacting the 19th and 18th century era in what is now Canada and North America. As far as I know, only the Conquest Cup is sanctioned by World Archery. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, we'll go to Istanbul in May, and we hope to go back in June and August. There is a 3D traditional competition in Finland. They have a fantastic 3D range. They have swimming, fishing, beavers, flying birds. It's gonna be really cool. And then there's a traditional competition in Hungary as well. I mean, there's lots of traditional competitions all around Europe, all the way from the UK or Ireland, the UK, to like Slovakia and Slovenia and Hungary and stuff like that. If I could, I would move to Europe and try and hit every single one of them. It's just a really amazing, phenomenal place, not just to shoot, but to learn. This is where you meet people like myself. And yeah, we just don't have a traditional archery thing going on here in North America too much, because the founding of these countries didn't have too much in the way of archery.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, World Archery sanctions the Conquest Cup, and the prizes can be pretty substantial, but we really go for the cultural mix and the learning, and we definitely go to win, but we're not just focused on winning.
So is there a lot of variety in terms of what the actual competition itself looks like the types of targets, the distance?
In Turkey, we shoot at something, and all your Spanish and Italian speakers are going to freak out right now. We shoot at something called the puta, which looks like a big avocado or a big pear. It's a traditional Turkish target from the Ottoman times. In England, they shoot at the big reed butts, like the ones you see in the Robin Hood movies. Yeah, there is a variety of targets. I mean, in Burma, they have a traditional archery competition, and they shoot at 100 meters, and most of the time they're drunk. So they encourage you to drink. I would love to go. I would really love to go and see that. That's something that's on my bucket list. But the competition, it kind of varies depending on who's hosting it, what country you're in. Yeah. I mean, I like I said, I did some Olympic stuff. I've watched the Olympians at Conquest Cup, and it's like what we do is, to me, infinitely more fun. We get to put on fancy outfits, and I mean, we just spent 3 months deciding what our outfit's gonna look like, and then we went fabric shopping, and but it depends who's hosting it and what country you're in. They're gonna, if I'm going to Turkey, I'm gonna expect to shoot at a traditional Turkish target. If I'm gonna go to Hungary, I'm probably gonna shoot at a traditional Magyar target. If I go to England, I'm most likely gonna end up shooting at what Robin Hood probably would have shot at. So same with Poland or anywhere you go, right? So
so have you done archery competitions in England?
I haven't. Actually, I missed one by a few days. I have shot with Ian Coote, and that was for a video game called Age of Empires, which was really going around in a circle for me, because the first game I ever played was the first Age of Empires. So that was a lot of fun. But I have not shot at a competition in England. I missed the competition in Wexford in Ireland by a day. I had to leave and go to France. Yeah, I mean, there's also traditional competitions in France as well. I've shot in Poland, Budapest, Hungary, Turkey, Italy. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. I might be missing something. I don't know.
I mean,
there's a really great traditional archery competition in Italy. Those people know how to throw a party. It's a really great competition. If you have a chance to go to that one.
Where in Italy is that one held?
It's in the northern part of Italy. I want to say it's outside of Florence, I think. I can send you some deets on that one, but yeah, it's a lot of fun because the Italian ensembles are quite the flair.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's just a lot of fun.
They know how to dress in Italy.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's just a lot of fun. Like, the Conquest Cup is fun, but it's also very serious because it's sanctioned by World Archery, right? It's sanctioned by our governing archery body. It wasn't at first. It is now. But some of the other ones, that are not, there's just a little bit more leeway to have a little bit more of a fun. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you should have fun. I mean, it should be fun.
Speaking of having fun with archery, one of the things that really catches people's attention all the time is trick archery.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any favorite examples, either that you have done yourself or you have seen others do, of what we might consider trick archery?
Yeah, my thing is the backwards lying down thing. I actually shoot better shooting backwards. Turning around, I'm more accurate going like this.
Sounds very Annie Oakley.
It's very Annie Oakley. Yes, yes. There's a fellow on Instagram. Actually, as soon as you said it, his name went right out of my head. But he does a lot of cool trick shots. His last video, he shot a grain of salt. Yeah, I really like him. There's no bravado there. He just does trick archery. That's his thing. And I think something we have to keep in mind with archery, because Lars Anderson, I have nothing against Lars Anderson, and he does he does he does trick archery. I mean, there are different types of archery, right? Lars Anderson could not do what he's doing with an English warbow or a Welsh warbow. It just wouldn't happen, right?
Mhm.
That's something I think we need to acknowledge. Is there's various different types of archery. There's Olympic archery, there's compound archery, there's hunting archery, there's trick archery, there's snap archery, there's film archery, there's archery tag, there's competition archery, there's traditional, there's historical. There's so many different types, and it's so varied. But if I wish I could remember that fella's name on Insta. I follow him, and I really like his stuff, and he's funny about it. I think he does the curving arrows. I can curve arrows. I think that when you have something like this that is such a strong part of your life, you can't let it get too serious. And I do funny trick shots here at Lykopis and at home, just to kind of keep it fun, keep it fun. There's also oh, what is her name? There's also a young lady on Instagram that also does some really cool trick shots, and to me, it's kind of funny when you actually look at the comments, and I think you would know where I'm going with this. Like,
Yeah.
his comments are totally different from her comments. She is constantly being called out of, like, you fake the shot and all this kind of stuff, but she does some pretty cool shots too. She uses an Olympic bow. He uses a bear bow. So he uses a modern bow, but with no sights or anything. I don't think hers has any sights, but hers isn't wood. It's a modern Olympic material. But
Okay.
she does some great shots. Like, I think she did one the other day. She threw like an aspirin or something in midair, and I, people are like, "Well, you can't do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. I can't do that, and I have no want to do that. Like, that's not my thing, right? I don't go shooting aspirins out of midair, but I will shoot a squirrel.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
12 squirrels make a stew. Say that 5 times fast. I dare your fans to say that 5 times fast. Yeah, it's shooting a squirrel's tough. But I think we need to respect what everybody does. You can't say Lars is like the foremost archer because
There's a lot of
he's
different
one of the
yeah.
yeah, and he's one of he's just got some slick YouTube stuff. His dates are wrong, but he's got some slick YouTube stuff, and I mean, that's just the nature of media. I like to shoot off my tricycle or something called an A-linker.
Hmm.
And when I say tricycle, I mean a recumbent bike. I used to shoot off my bicycle. And our horse archery coordinator, Louise Fisk, she does some pretty cool stuff from the horse as well. So
Yeah. And I mean,
yeah.
and that's one of the things that always impresses me. And I know it's a whole style of archery that has a very long tradition, but the idea of
Mm,
to fire a bow while on anything that's moving uh,
mm,
sounds extremely difficult to me.
mm-hmm. You got to get your timing right. It's really a lot about timing. So yeah, before we launched our horse archery program here at Lykopis, for 4 years, when I was in Europe, I was training, and now I don't ride. I definitely don't ride as much as I would like. I would like to ride some more, but I don't ride on a regular basis. I'm not a horse rider, but I went over and I trained with as many people as I possibly could to learn as many methods as I possibly could. So when we launched our program here, we had a well-rounded program, and I incorporated what I learned into our own program. And to me, that's just a way of that's what we should all be doing, is learning and passing on that knowledge. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, before we go, if somebody is really interested in archery and really wants to get into it but isn't sure where to start, and they're not fortunate enough to live in the vicinity of your Lykopis school,
Mm.
what advice would you have for somebody?
Find a local club, and something to keep in mind is every coach is going to be different, right? If you're with a coach and it's not making, and that coach is not, like, you don't feel supported or you don't feel like you're learning. Too many times have I had people come to me and be like, "Yeah, I did archery when I was younger, but I kind of got turned off it because my coach was a dick," or I was a young woman and men were berating me, or I was a young man and guys were making me feel like I was weak or whatever. Find a local club and find a mentor that's going to be supportive of you. Do not take or anything you see on YouTube, make sure you take with a large cup of salt. Do not try to imitate or emulate what you see people doing on YouTube.
Yeah, probably not what you want to start with.
And everything is kind of true, but make sure that you have sources for what you're learning. And again, recognize that there are multiple different types of archery. Like, we as traditional archers and historical archers, I'm not gonna lie, like, that is, we get a lot of kickback from modern archers. We get been at competitions where Olympic archers have come and just thrown our bows into the puddles because they look at us and they laugh because we're in funny outfits. Don't be that person. And B, if you're the person being laughed at, just walk away. And if that's your passion, if you're really interested in it, and that's something I mentioned earlier, like, working in Hollywood is hard. Like, it was emotionally and physically, I went gray. It was hard. But all it took was if that 8 years on Arrow, one person coming to me and saying, hey, I picked up a bow and arrow because I saw Stephen Amell as the Green Arrow, then it was worth it. Right. So if you're interested in archery, go out there and find a club, find a club, and don't let anyone stop you. Don't let anyone stop you. There are so many resources, good resources out there. They're going to help you get where you want to be, and take your time. Archery, I can't remember which documentary I was watching, but the archery instructor, it was a father and son archaeology team. And the archery instructor literally was like, the dad was kind of berating the son a little bit. And the archery instructor looked at him and he's like, archery is the great leveler. It doesn't matter what background you come from. It doesn't matter who you are. A bow and arrow will put you in your place if you mess around, right? It is a great leveler. It doesn't matter if it's you. It doesn't matter if it's me. It doesn't matter if it's the person standing next to me. All of us are on the same plane when we start. Mm-hmm. And archery, to me, obviously, it has been a lifelong journey. I am still learning things. I will be learning things until probably I'm on my deathbed or hammock. Yeah, just keep learning and be patient with yourself. I prefer, here at Lykopis, we teach archery with a lot more of an Eastern influence than a Western influence. It's not about getting to the target. It's not about getting your arrow at the target. It's about your form, your focus, your breathing. Because if you can get those things in control, you'd be amazed at how that affects your life as a whole. So yeah, enjoy your passion and don't let anybody else tell you that it's lame or dumb or you're not doing a good job. And a lot of people, social media, we're so much on social media these days. Oh, you see a picture of someone shooting, they're like, oh, the arrow's on the wrong side of the bow. And then there's all this vitriol following it. You know what? There's no wrong way to do archery. I have this saying, and my staff repeats it. There's only one wrong way to do archery, and that's if you're hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Whether that's inside or physically whacking your arm. Yeah. Or the reason I don't have any nose rings anymore.
Oh,
oh yeah, that hurt. Right.
Ouch.
But if you're hurting yourself, then there's something wrong. And that's a pretty good lesson to take for life too.
Yeah.
Right.
Getting proper equipment, that helps, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. Getting proper. Do not my
wear your
advice
arm guard.
Do not buy archery equipment off Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't do that. That's just, I very rarely am like really strong on like, don't do this, but that is, yeah, don't do that. Also, we don't shoot with arm guards here at Lykopis. Our method of teaching, you do not need an arm guard at all. In fact, the only draw that we teach here where you do need an arm guard is the warbow, the low warbow draw, not the high warbow draw. So yeah. And, don't go spend a ton of money on equipment right off the bat. Most schools like us, we provide all the equipment for you at the beginning. And yeah, the US has a lot of archery clubs. Just remember that there's lots of different types of archery. It doesn't all have to be Olympic.
Yeah. I think that's some really good advice. I think that was a lot of interesting topics that we ranged all over with.
I feel like I talk too much. I almost feel like I talk much.
Well, you've got a lot of things to say, and you're very passionate about the subject, which is why I wanted to talk to you. You know, I heard you give that interview on Saga Thing, and it's like, ooh, this is a person who knows about this, thinks about it, and is passionate about it. And that's
love those
really
guys.
one of the capture.
Thanks. We love your podcast. Eva's been listening to your podcast. You've had a good influence on us here, especially on the with her preparing for Robin Hood camp. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
That's so, you know, that really is so heartening, you know, very bolstering.
That's awesome. Anyway, you probably have to go because it's like almost 9 o'clock your time. I have to go teach class. So
all right,
it was a pleasure speaking to you forever and ever.
Yes, it's been a lot of fun. Good luck with your class.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you for reaching out.
Yeah.
And keep the podcast coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you again to Patricia Gonsalves for joining me in the Greenwood. As you heard, there is no lack of topics relevant to the interests of this podcast that she is able to speak on. And tragically, much of our discussion ended up on the digital cutting room floor for the sake of time. If you're interested in hearing more, including some of Patricia's adventures hunting down historical bows in Schleswig, Germany, or how she incorporates her tattoos into her archery lessons, then keep an eye out for some bonus audio over on the Patreon feed. That's patreon.com/IntoGreenwood. There, for a paltry few dollars an episode, you can find access to all of the various bits of bonus audio we have, and help us afford to keep our quivers full. And, more importantly, pay our web hosting fees. You can also help the podcast by giving us a positive rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you happen to be listening. Into the Greenwood is really lacking in reviews, which means we're less likely to be recommended by those algorithms that increasingly control our fates. If you need more of the amazing Patricia Gonsalves in your life, please check out the episode description where I will include a link for her Lykopis school, as well as the amazing Saga Thing interview that she gave with Stephen Fox. I'll also include links to some of the things we discussed in the episode, including the breathtaking Holmegaard Bow, a Smithsonian article on Ötzi the Iceman's unfinished archery kit, and the museum dedicated to the Mary Rose. If you'd like to get in touch to let us know how Robin Hood has influenced you, to suggest a topic for the show, or just about anything else, our email is intogreenwood@gmail.com, and we're on most of the major social media sites with the handle @IntoGreenwood. Friend of the show, Mike Nichols, has set up a Discord server where we organize watch parties, hold trivia contests, participate in a book club, and more. If you'd like to get an invite, just get in touch over email, social media, or our Patreon page. Into the Greenwood is produced and hosted by me, Thaddeus Papke, and our theme music is by Plastic 3. That's all for now, though. So once again, I find myself wishing safe travels to you, one and all, until our next journey together into the Greenwood.